My name is Avery Morrison. I'm 29 years old. And 3 weeks ago, my father died in a hospital room while I was sitting in my apartment 40 minutes away, eating leftover Chinese food and watching a game I didn't even care about. He updated his will 5 days before his stroke. He left the house to my older brother, the investment accounts to my younger sister, the family business shares to my uncle, and to me, a sealed envelope with one sentence inside. The lawyer read it out loud. My brother went pale. My sister grabbed the edge of the table like she needed something to hold on to. My dad never expected me to open it right there in that room. But I did. And that one sentence didn't destroy me the way he planned. Set me free. I grew up in a house where I was always just a little bit off. Like a song playing in the wrong key. My dad, Gerald Morrison, made sure I understood that without ever saying it out loud. My brother Marcus had Gerald's wide shoulders and his competitive streak. My sister Dana had his sharp eyes and his talent for numbers. And then there was me. Quieter. Smaller framed. Brown-eyed in a family full of gray-eyed people. Kind of kid who sits at the dinner table and wonders why she feels like a guest. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, drop a comment with your city and the time it is wherever you are. I genuinely love knowing where you're watching from. Now let me take you all the way back to 3 weeks ago. Call came on a Thursday morning. I was at my desk at Clearwater Financial Partners, a mid-size accounting firm in downtown Raleigh, North Carolina, working through a client's quarterly review when my phone lit up. The name on the screen was Walter Finch, attorney at law. I picked up on the second ring. Avery. His voice had that practiced steadiness lawyers use when they've made this kind of call 100 times. I'm calling about your father. Gerald passed this morning. Complications from the stroke. I set my highlighter down on the desk. The office kept humming around me. Keyboards clicking. Printer running. Someone laughing in the break room. Thank you for telling me, Walter. A pause. There's something else. Gerald updated his will several days before he was hospitalized. There are some things I'd strongly recommend you be present for. The reading is set for next Friday. My office. 9 a.m. I wrote it on a sticky note. Date, time, location. Like a client appointment. The last time I'd spoken to my father was 6 months before. He'd called to let me know Marcus was getting a commendation from the city council, something about his real estate development work, and that the whole family was going to dinner at Carmine's to celebrate. He said it casually, like maybe he'd mentioned it before and I'd just forgotten. He hadn't. And I wasn't invited. I said, "That's great, Dad. Tell Marcus congratulations." He said, "I will." That was it. 6 months of silence until Walter Finch called me on a Thursday. I didn't leave work early. I finished the quarterly review, emailed it to my supervisor, and drove home at 5:30. I'd already done most of my grieving for Gerald Morrison a long time before the stroke took him. Growing up in the Morrison house was like growing up in a photograph where one face was slightly blurry. Not erased. Just never quite in focus. Marcus, 4 years older than me, had Gerald's build and his drive. He was the kind of guy who got named team captain without running for it. Dana, 2 years younger than me, was sharp and funny and Gerald's obvious favorite. She could make him laugh from across a room just by raising an eyebrow. And then there was me. I was quiet. I liked books and numbers and long walks that went nowhere in particular. Gerald tolerated me. That's the most honest way I can put it. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't mean. He just looked at me like I was a puzzle he'd stopped trying to solve a long time ago and put back on the shelf. There were comments over the years. Small ones. Kind you file away without meaning to and then find yourself coming back to at 2 in the morning when you can't sleep. When I was about 14, Gerald's buddy Ray was over for a cookout. I walked out back to get a soda from the cooler and heard Gerald say, "Marcus is mine, through and through." Dana too. Avery's a good kid, but... He trailed off. Shrugged. Ray laughed about something else and the moment passed. I went back inside and pretended I hadn't heard. I thought about that shrug for years. Not the sentence. The shrug. 'Cause the sentence you can argue with, explain away, reframe. A shrug just is what it is. A shrug is a man telling you exactly how he feels about you without using any words he'll have to stand behind later. There were other moments. Gerald coaching Marcus's baseball team every spring from the time Marcus was 8 until he was 16. Never once showing up for a single one of my soccer games, even when the field was 4 blocks from our house. Telling me in 9th grade that I should be realistic about college when I said I wanted to study finance. Marcus got a car for his 16th birthday, a used Honda but still a car with a bow on it. I got a savings bond and a firm handshake. I told myself it was just how Gerald was. Some dads aren't built for warmth. Some dads do better with some kids than others. I told myself a lot of things that kept me functional and got me through school and into a career. You build a whole internal architecture around the holes in your life, and after a while you forget the architecture isn't the actual house. My mom, Linda, she and Gerald divorced when I was 11, never said much about any of it. She raised me mostly on her own after the split, working double shifts at Mercy General as a nurse. She was warm and strong and smelled like peppermint soap and always had time to hear about my day even when she'd been on her feet for 12 hours. She was the kind of person who made you feel like the most interesting thing she'd encountered all week, even if you were just telling her about a book report. She passed from lung cancer when I was 24. Never smoked a day in her life. Life's funny like that. I think about her a lot when I try to process all of this. Because she knew. She had to know. And she chose, for whatever reason, love or fear or something else I'll never fully understand, to keep the secret. I don't hold it against her. I can't. She's not here to explain it, and she spent her whole life giving me everything she had to give. But I do wonder sometimes, late on quiet evenings, what she would say to me now if she could. I think she'd say she was sorry. And I think I'd tell her it was okay. And I think we'd both know that okay and all right aren't exactly the same thing. At her funeral, Gerald stood near the back. He didn't speak to me. When I caught his eye across the room, he nodded once. The nod you give a stranger at a 4-way stop. Then he walked out before the reception even started. I put that away too. I had a whole storage unit's worth of things I'd put away over the years. Marcus called me 3 days before Gerald was scheduled for surgery. I didn't know about the surgery until that call. Hey, Dad's going in for a procedure on his heart. Just wanted you to know. He said it the way you'd report the weather. Like information you pass along out of obligation, not care. What kind of procedure? Bypass. It's planned. He's been dealing with blockage for a while. Is he? Should I come see him? A pause. He didn't ask for you, Avery. I sat with that for a second. Okay. Just thought you should know. He hung up. Gerald went in on a Tuesday. He didn't come out. That evening, Dana posted on Instagram a photo of her and Marcus and Uncle Ronnie in the hospital waiting room. Pale blue walls, vending machine in the background, everyone looking appropriately solemn. Caption read, "Family." Through everything. I stared at that photo for a long time. My thumbs hovered over my phone, but I didn't type anything. Didn't like it. Didn't comment. I just closed the app and stood in my kitchen in the dark. Walter Finch called again 2 days later. I want to make sure you're planning to attend the reading. The way he said it wasn't a question. There was something layered underneath the professionalism. Wait. I know I have the right to be there. I strongly recommend you come, Avery. He paused. I want to be careful about what I say on this call. But please come. Lawyers don't say strongly recommend casually. They say you may wish to consider or it could be in your interest. Walter said strongly recommend the way a doctor says you need to come in for these results. Not a suggestion. A warning wrapped in a suit. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a beer I didn't drink and thought about whether to go. My apartment in Raleigh was quiet. One bedroom. A bookshelf I'd built from a kit when I was 22. Plants that I actually kept alive. A life I'd built from scratch without any help from anyone in that house. Walking into that reading meant walking back into the one room I'd spent the better part of a decade walking away from. But if I stayed home, Marcus and Dana would own the whole story. They'd divide what Gerald left, close ranks, and I'd be erased from the paperwork the same way I'd been erased from the Instagram post. I wasn't going for Gerald. I was going for me. My coworker Priya noticed the sticky note on my monitor the next morning. Walter Finch. Friday. 9 a.m. Everything okay? She asked. My dad left me something. I don't know what it is yet, but I have a right to find out. Priya leaned against the partition. After everything? You're still showing up. I peeled the sticky note off and pressed it into my planner. Not for him. For me. Friday came faster than I was ready for. I put on a gray button-down, pressed it the night before, and drove to Walter Finch's office on Commerce Street in downtown Raleigh. Second floor above a coffee shop. Kind of place where the air smells like printer ink and old carpet. Conference room was small. Dark wood table. Leather chairs that creaked when you shifted. Framed certificates on the wall. Mini blinds half drawn against the morning sun. Everyone was already seated when I walked in. Marcus sat at the far end, arms crossed, wearing a navy blazer like he'd already decided this was a formality. His wife, Brooke, was next to him, scrolling her phone. Dana sat beside her, legs crossed, expression unreadable. Her boyfriend Derek slouched in the corner, clearly there for moral support and nothing else. Uncle Ronnie, Gerald's older brother, the one who'd always been around the house when we were kids, sat near the window with his hands flat on the table like he was bracing for something. There was also a woman I didn't recognize at first, sitting near the door. Mid-50s, gray-streaked natural hair, wire-rimmed glasses. She had a legal notepad in front of her. I found out later her name was Donna Hewitt. She was Gerald's longtime business partner. And she knew something the rest of us didn't. The head of the table, Walter Finch. Silver hair. Wire-rimmed glasses. A manila folder and one sealed envelope laid out in front of him like two very different kinds of truth. I stepped in. The room went quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet when someone arrives who wasn't really expected. Marcus looked up. You came. Not surprised. Not warm. Just noting it. Dana glanced at me and then back at the table. I pulled out the empty chair, the one closest to the door obviously, and sat down. Uncle Ronnie reached over and gripped my forearm. His hand was heavy and warm. He didn't say anything. He just held it for a second longer than necessary. Like he was apologizing for something he hadn't done yet. Walter opened the folder. On the table beside it, in plain sight, the sealed envelope. My name written across the front in black ink. Gerald's handwriting. Blocky capital letters. Caleb. He'd pressed hard into the paper. Like he'd wanted to make sure the letters stayed. Walter cleared his throat. I, Gerald Raymond Morrison of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils. Marcus's chin tilted up just slightly. Posture of a man expecting good news. To my son, Marcus Gerald Morrison, I leave the family home at 318 Hillcrest Drive, Raleigh, North Carolina, including all contents and furnishings therein. Marcus exhaled through his nose. Brooke put her hand on his knee. That wasn't comfort. That was told you so. To my daughter, Dana Lynn Morrison, I leave the entirety of the investment portfolio and retirement accounts, currently valued at approximately $260,000. Dana stared at the table. She didn't react. Dana never reacted when she already knew the outcome. To my brother Ronald Arthur Morrison, I leave the remaining 40% share of Morrison Commercial Partners, LLC, to be merged with his existing 60% ownership. Uncle Ronnie stared out the window. Walter paused. He took his glasses off, cleaned them with his tie, put them back on. Then he looked directly at me. Just me. And to my son Avery James Morrison, this envelope to be opened at the reading. He lifted it and slid it across the table. Dana turned to look at me. Her expression did something complicated, a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't quite a smile. It was closer to pity wearing a mask of satisfaction. Marcus leaned back in his chair. A letter. Classic Dad. Always had a flair for the dramatic. I took the envelope. It weighed almost nothing. Everything Gerald Morrison owned divided 3 ways and my share fit in my palm. The envelope was standard size. White. Sealed tight. My name in block letters. Marcus spoke first. Go ahead, Avery. We're all waiting. Derek, Dana's boyfriend, shifted in his seat. He looked at Dana and then quickly looked away. Donna Hewitt hadn't said a word. But she was watching me. Not the envelope. Her expression was careful. Controlled. The expression of someone who knows exactly what's about to happen and has decided not to warn anyone. Walter said, Avery, you're not required to open it here. You can take it home and... He should open it here, Marcus said. The will specifies the reading. It specifies the reading as the occasion, Walter replied carefully. But Avery has the right to. I'll open it. The room went still. I said it before I'd fully made the decision. But once it was out, I meant it. If Gerald had something to say to me, the last thing he'd ever say, I wasn't going to read it alone at midnight in my apartment on Birchwood Lane. I was going to read it here in front of the people he actually showed up for in the room he designed for this moment. I slid my thumb under the flap and tore it open. Inside, a single sheet of white paper folded once. I unfolded it. 1 sentence. Blue ink. Block letters, same as the envelope. Gerald's handwriting. I read it once. Then again. My face didn't move. I made sure of it. The room held its breath. I looked up. Walter, please read it out loud. Walter blinked. Something flickered behind his eyes. Avery, read it out loud, please. I passed the paper across the table. He took it. He read it silently first. I watched the color drain out of his face in real time. He set the paper flat on the table, pressed his fingertips against the edge, and looked at me. I nodded. Walter read. Avery is not my biological daughter. Her father is Thomas Aldridge. Silence. 3 seconds. 5. 7. The air conditioning cycled on and filled the room with white noise. Marcus stood up so fast his chair scraped back against the wall. What? That's not. Dana made a sound I'd never heard from her before. A small, broken exhale. She covered her mouth with both hands. Uncle Ronnie closed his eyes. He pressed his lips together and sat very still. Not shocked. Devastated. There's a difference. Shock is when you don't see it coming. What was on Ronnie's face was the look of a man watching something he'd always feared finally arrive. Brooke's phone dropped onto the table. Derek said nothing. Just stared at the wall. Donna Hewitt set her notepad down very slowly. Then she looked at me. And me? I sat with my hands flat on the table. My spine straight. Something was moving underneath everything, deep and tectonic, the kind of shift that rearranges the whole landscape without making a sound. 29 years. Every holiday I spent feeling like I was visiting someone else's family. Every time Gerald looked at me with that expression I could never translate. Every photo where I was technically present but somehow not quite in it. I finally knew why. So that's why, I thought. Not out loud. Just the thought, quiet and enormous, sitting in my chest like a stone settling to the bottom of a lake. That's why I never fit. So that's why, I said quietly. Marcus turned on me, jaw tight. This changes everything. If he's not even a Morrison legally, this whole thing has to be. Legally, Walter said, the will stands as written. Avery is named as the beneficiary. He received the envelope. The distribution is complete. An envelope? Marcus's voice cracked. He gets a letter and you're calling that a distribution? It's what your father specified. Dana found her voice. It was smaller than usual. Careful. Avery. She looked at me directly for the first time in years. You understand what he was trying to do, right? He wanted you to know that I don't belong here? I let the sentence breathe in the air for everyone to hear. Maybe. Or maybe he just gave me the only honest thing he ever had to offer. Marcus opened his mouth. I kept going. You got the house. Dana got the money. Uncle Ronnie got the business. I picked up the envelope. I got the truth. Let's see which one matters more. Walter asked everyone else to give us the room. People filed out in various states of disarray. Marcus left first, practically pulling Brooke by the wrist. Dana lingered for a moment in the doorway, looking at me with an expression I still haven't fully decoded, then followed him out. Uncle Ronnie was last. He stopped beside my chair, put his hand on my shoulder, squeezed once, hard, and walked out without a word. Donna Hewitt paused at the door. She had her notepad tucked under her arm and her car keys in her hand. She looked at me and said, Thomas Aldridge was a good man. Better than most people in this county ever gave him credit for. Then she walked out. I looked at Walter. You knew. Walter sat back down. Not until this morning. I knew Gerald had something specific for you. I didn't know what. He folded his hands on the table. But Donna Hewitt knew. She's been carrying this for a long time. I stared at the envelope in my hands. Thomas Aldridge, Walter said carefully, was a professor. Philosophy and ethics at NC State. He passed away about 18 months ago. Prostate cancer. He let that land. However, Walter continued, his estate attorney, a man named Carl Peterson, reached out to me roughly a year ago. He was looking for someone. A daughter he believed existed but had never been able to locate. Walter paused. Your father, your biological father, knew he had a child. He spent years trying to find you. Gerald blocked every single attempt. Changed addresses. Changed your mother's listed contact information. Moved parishes. The room was very quiet. He looked for me, I said. Not a question. Just the weight of the sentence settling. He looked for you, Walter confirmed. Carl Peterson told me that Thomas Aldridge said, and I'm recounting this from memory, that his biggest regret was a child he'd brought into the world and never been allowed to know. My throat tightened. I'd spent 29 years believing I was Gerald Morrison's overlooked son. Kid who didn't quite fit. The one who got a shrug instead of an answer. And somewhere in this same city, a man who actually wanted me had been looking. He had other family? I asked. Walter nodded. A daughter? Rebecca Aldridge. She's 34. She still lives in the area. She has been hoping for this day for a long time. Marcus called that night. No greeting. This is insane. Dad was clearly not in his right mind. I'm calling his doctors first thing tomorrow. I'm going to prove diminished capacity. He drove himself to Walter's office 5 days before the stroke, Marcus. He asked 2 clarifying questions about the will and signed it in front of 2 witnesses. A deathbed confession doesn't just. It's not a confession. It's an inheritance. I surprised myself with that one. It's the most valuable thing he ever left me. You can't use this to chase Aldridge money. I'm warning you. You're warning me, I repeated. Silence. Good night, Marcus. I hung up. Screenshotted the call log. Not for anything legal. Just a record. A reminder of how fast family loyalty turns into property law when someone's inheritance is at stake. Dana texted at midnight. 3 messages in a row. I didn't know. I want you to know that. Mom never said anything to me either. I'm sorry, Avery. For real. I read them 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the counter and went to bed. I don't know what I felt about Dana's texts. I still don't, honestly. Maybe relief. Maybe it was too late. Maybe both at the same time. The next morning I typed 2 words into my browser. Thomas Aldridge. The results came back clean and substantial. 28 years on the faculty at NC State. Philosophy and ethics. A reputation that showed up in article after article. Thoughtful, rigorous, the kind of professor whose former students quoted him in their dissertations 15 years later. He'd published 2 books. He'd won a teaching award 3 times. He'd started a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. His obituary had run in the News and Observer. The headline called him a quiet giant of the academic community. He'd never remarried after his divorce. He'd raised Rebecca mostly alone after her mother moved to Seattle when Rebecca was 12. I scrolled through his photos. Faculty headshots. Retirement ceremony pictures. A photo from a community ethics panel. Him sitting at a long table mid-sentence, gesturing with his hands. I zoomed in on his face. Long jaw. Brown eyes with a slight downward tilt at the outer corners. Narrow hands. My jaw. My eyes. My hands. I'd spent 29 years in a family where I looked like no one. And here was a stranger on a university website, and I was looking at my own face. He'd been 20 minutes away my entire childhood. Same city. Same grocery stores. Probably the same little league fields. 20 minutes and 29 years. I closed the laptop, pressed my palms on the counter, and just breathed for a while. My father hadn't just been hidden from me. Gerald had hidden me from him. Kept 2 people who might have found each other 20 miles and a whole lifetime apart. I sat in my kitchen until 2 a.m. Then I picked up my phone and called Carl Peterson. He answered on the second ring like he'd been waiting. Carl Peterson's office was on Hillsborough Street, not far from the NC State campus. 3rd floor. Big windows. A view of the bell tower if you angled right. He was in his 60s. White hair, careful eyes, the unhurried manner of a man who had learned to say important things slowly. He'd laid out the paperwork before I arrived. A trust Thomas Aldridge had established 4 years before his death. A provision for a biological child, confirmed through DNA testing. The provision included an endowed scholarship in Aldridge's name at NC State, Avery's to administer if she chose. An investment account valued at approximately $280,000. A craftsman-style house on Yadkin Road in the Boylan Heights neighborhood. Modest. Well-kept. The house Thomas had lived in for the last 12 years of his life. Total value of the provision, approximately $450,000. I did the math before Carl even finished speaking. It's what accountants do. Gerald's entire estate, the house with a second mortgage Dana didn't know about yet, the investment accounts, the business stake, was worth somewhere around $360,000 split 3 ways. My dad thought he left me nothing. He left me the one sentence that unlocked everything. There's one more thing, Carl said. He slid a photo across the desk. A man and a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, standing in front of a magnolia tree. The little girl was grinning, gap-toothed, holding a dandelion up toward the camera. The man was laughing with his whole face. He kept this in his desk, Carl said. Someone mailed it to him anonymously. About 12 years ago. I turned the photo over. On the back, in neat handwriting, Avery, age 5. Easter asterisk. He called you the one he couldn't find, Carl said quietly. He said it like that. Like it was a title. Something he carried. I set the photo down. My hands were not steady. Who sent this to him? Carl shook his head. He never found out. But he kept it. Frame and all. For 12 years. The DNA test took 8 days. 8 days of going to work at Clearwater Financial, balancing ledgers, eating lunch at my desk, and pretending the ground wasn't shifting underneath everything I thought I knew about myself. I'd submitted the sample at a certified lab Carl had arranged. Comparison against Thomas Aldridge's medical records, a genetic panel he'd filed 5 years before his death. 8 days is a long time when you're waiting to find out who you are. Cooked a lot that week. I don't know why. I made pasta from scratch one night even though I'd never done it before. I reorganized my bookshelf twice. I went for runs at 6 in the morning before work and came home wired and exhausted at the same time. Rebecca texted me 3 times during those 8 days. Not asking for updates. Just thinking about you. And Dad's study has really good light in the afternoons if you ever want to come by. And I made that sweet potato hash again. There's leftovers if you want some. I didn't go by. Not yet. I needed the DNA first. I needed the fact before I let myself feel what the fact might mean. On a Tuesday afternoon my phone rang. I was in the parking garage at Clearwater, engine off, sitting in the dark of a concrete structure with a coffee I'd forgotten to drink going cold in the cup holder. Carl Peterson. 99.9% match, he said. Avery, you are the biological daughter of Thomas Raymond Aldridge. I held the phone against my ear and listened to him explain what came next. Trust would activate. The house, the accounts, the scholarship fund. He ran through the numbers carefully, the way a good attorney does, not rushing, giving you time to absorb each piece. I did the math without meaning to. It's what accountants do. Gerald's entire estate, the house with Aline Marcus was going to discover, the investment accounts, the business stake, was worth roughly $360,000 split 3 ways. What Thomas Aldridge had set aside for me, $450,000. My father thought he left me nothing. He left me the one sentence that unlocked everything. There's one more thing, Carl said. He told me about Rebecca, about the gathering she was planning, about the way she'd been hoping for this phone call for 18 months. I sat in that parking garage for 25 minutes after the call ended. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just sat there in the dark and let it be real. Let all of it be real at once. The loss of a father I never had, the finding of one I didn't know was looking, the sister waiting on a porch in Boylan Heights, the photograph on a desk. A 4-year-old boy holding a dandelion. Kept for 12 years. I finally started the engine and drove home. Rebecca Aldridge lived in the Boylan Heights house. She'd moved back in after Thomas passed to deal with his estate and then just stayed. She told me later the house felt like the right place to wait, even though she hadn't known exactly what she was waiting for. She was waiting on the front porch when I pulled up. 34 years old, shorter than I'd expected, with Thomas's exact eyes and a directness about her that felt immediately familiar. Kind of person who says what she means without making a production out of it. She saw me coming up the front walk and said, "You walk like him." Same pace. Hands in your pockets. I stopped at the bottom of the steps. I didn't know what to say. That happens sometimes when something is too large for small words. She didn't wait. She came down the steps and pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than either of us planned. She was stronger than she looked. I held on and something in my chest unknotted itself for the first time in as long as I could remember. "He talked about you," she said against my shoulder. "Not every day. But enough that I grew up knowing there was a you. He called you the one he was still looking for. Like you were always just around the next corner, just a little out of reach." She showed me the house. Creaking hardwood floors that spoke every time you crossed them. kitchen that smelled like coffee and something earthy like decades of books, a back bedroom with a patchwork quilt Thomas's mother had made in 1974, and the study, floor-to-ceiling shelves, a reading chair worn smooth at the armrests from years of use, a desk with a green glass lamp, books stacked in the organized chaos of someone who actually reads, and on the desk in a plain silver frame a photograph of a little boy, 4 years old, brown eyes, dandelion held up toward the camera, gap-toothed grin. Me. He kept it there for 12 years. I picked up the frame. My hands were shaking and I didn't try to hide it. "He loved you from a distance," Rebecca said softly from the doorway. "He didn't have any other choice. But he never stopped. He dusted that frame himself. Wouldn't let anyone else touch it. I stood in that study for a long time. The afternoon light came in long strips. Dust moved through the air. 35 miles. That's the distance between the Morrison house on Hillcrest Drive and this house on Yadkin Road. 20 minutes on a clear day. My whole life. The news traveled the way news does in a city big enough to have strangers but small enough that everyone's in the same 6 degrees of separation. By Monday, people I worked with had heard. People from Gerald's professional circle had heard. Donna Hewitt told me later that 2 separate people called her that weekend to ask if it was true. She told them both, yes. At work, I kept my head down and did my job. I reconciled 3 client accounts in 2 days, which was a personal record. There's something about emotional upheaval that makes detailed, methodical work feel grounding. Numbers don't have agendas. A balance sheet doesn't care about your family drama. It either reconciles or it doesn't. Priya brought me coffee every morning that week without saying why. On Thursday, she put a sticky note on the cup that said, "You're doing great, FYI." I kept that note. It's on my refrigerator right now. My supervisor, Paul, stopped by my office on Wednesday. "Doors open if you need it." He'd never said that before. Then he added, "Also, the Brentwood file has a discrepancy in Q2. It could really use your eyes on it." Life kept going. That's the thing nobody warns you about when your whole foundation shifts. The ground rearranges and then the alarm still goes off at 6:30 and there's still traffic on I-40 and the Brentwood file still has a Q2 discrepancy. You don't get a pause button. You just carry the new information while also carrying everything else. The legal challenge came fast. Marcus and Brooke hired an attorney from Greensboro, young guy, aggressive, clearly motivated by the billing rate. He filed a claim of undue influence and mental incapacity against Gerald's estate within 10 days of the reading. The argument: Gerald Morrison was an elderly man compromised by cardiovascular illness and medication. His sealed letter was the product of confusion or manipulation, possibly induced by outside parties. The will should be reconsidered. Walter destroyed it in under 15 minutes. Gerald Morrison was 61 years old, Walter said at the hearing. He drove himself to my office. He reviewed every clause of the will, asked about the tax implications of 2 specific provisions, and signed in the presence of myself and my legal secretary, Andrea Park. He added the sealed envelope as a personal addendum and specified in his own handwriting that it be opened at the reading. Walter paused. The petitioner's claim names no influencer. Avery Morrison had not spoken to his father in 6 months prior to Gerald's death. He did not know about the envelope's contents until the moment it was opened. He did not request it. He did not draft it. He simply opened it. The judge, a woman named Holloway who had apparently known Thomas Aldridge professionally, reviewed everything. She looked at Marcus's attorney. She looked at Walter. There is no evidence of undue influence. No evidence of diminished capacity. The will stands. Marcus was on his phone before he cleared the courtroom doors. I walked out behind him. In the back row of seats, I saw Donna Hewitt. She'd come to watch. When our eyes met, she gave me a single slow nod. Outside the courthouse, I sent Rebecca a text. It held. The will stands. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, Dad would have liked that it happened in that building. I stood on the courthouse steps and looked up at the plaque above the main entrance. There was a bench dedicated to Thomas Aldridge in the lobby. I hadn't noticed it on the way in. The trust signing happened on a Thursday morning. Sunlight came through the blinds in gold stripes across Carl's desk. I signed each page carefully, the way I'd sign a client's tax return, 'cause that's what I understand. Numbers, documents, the weight of things that are recorded and real. Rebecca signed as witness. When it was done, she set her pen down and covered my hand with hers. Dad used to say the truth always travels, she said. It just takes its time. Carl extended his hand. Congratulations, Avery. I shook it. On the walk out through the lobby, I stopped at Thomas Aldridge's bench. It was simple. Walnut wood. A small brass plaque, Thomas R. Aldridge. In pursuit of honest questions. I sat down on it for a moment. Just a moment. Then I got up and walked out into the October air. That week, I found out who sent the photograph. It was Donna Hewitt. She came to find me at Clearwater Financial on a Wednesday afternoon. Asked if we could talk. I took her down to the coffee shop on the ground floor and we sat at a corner table near the window. It was raining outside, one of those slow October rains that doesn't seem to be in any hurry. She ordered black coffee. She looked like a woman who had been practicing this conversation in her head for a long time and still wasn't sure she'd gotten it right. Gerald and Thomas knew each other through a professional association, she said. This was years ago, before you were born. Your mother was working at a hospital conference. That's where she met Thomas. Gerald was out of town for 3 weeks on a project. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. Your mother and Thomas, that wasn't nothing. I want you to know that. From what Thomas told me years later, it was real. It mattered. And then Gerald came home. She paused. Your mother found out she was pregnant. She told Gerald the truth, that there was a chance the child wasn't his. I don't know what that conversation looked like. But Gerald made a decision. He told her he would raise the child as his own. And he told Thomas that if he ever contacted your mother or the child, he would end his career. She looked at me. Gerald had connections. He sat on a board that funded Thomas's research department. He meant it and Thomas knew he meant it. But Thomas kept trying. He hired a private investigator when you were about 7. Gerald found out and followed through on part of the threat. He pulled 2 grants from Thomas's department. After that, Thomas backed off for a few years. Then he tried again when you were 12. Gerald threatened his tenure. She exhaled. This went on for years. A man being systematically blocked from his own child. I stared out at the rain. When Thomas got sick, he asked Carl to find you through official channels. Carl tried for a year. Every lead went cold. She set her cup down. I worked with Gerald for 20 years. I knew things. I kept his files. I knew about the investigator reports, the legal threats. I knew it all. Her voice tightened. When Thomas passed and I heard Carl was still looking, I went into Gerald's old files and I found your 2nd grade school photo. He kept it. I don't know why he kept it. Maybe because some part of him knew. She met my eyes. I mailed it to Carl's office in a plain envelope. No return address. I was still afraid. Gerald was still alive. But I did that much. The photograph on Thomas's desk. The gap-toothed boy with the dandelion. That was you, I said. She nodded. A single tear tracked down the side of her face. She didn't wipe it. I should have done more. I know that. I had years of information that could have found you faster. But Gerald I was afraid of what he'd do to my career, my livelihood. I had a daughter in college. I was a coward. She looked at her hands. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know it was me who sent it, and I needed you to know that Thomas was a good man who never stopped wanting to find you. You did enough, I said. It was the truth. The photo reached him. He kept it for 12 years. She pressed her lips together. Something in her shoulders let go. We sat there in the rain for another 20 minutes talking about Thomas. What he was like. Kind of professor he was. The way he'd run that ethics seminar every fall and somehow make a room full of 19-year-olds genuinely argue about what was right. He would have liked you, she said as we stood to leave. How do you know? She smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from her. He liked people who were honest and quiet and smarter than they let on. That's all of you, son. She called me son without even noticing she'd done it. I didn't point it out. I just held on to it on the drive home. Raleigh shifts the way cities do. Not with announcements. With glances. Conversations that start in one direction and end somewhere else. People who knew Gerald started looking at the story differently. Not Avery Morrison, the odd one out. Gerald Morrison, the man who kept a secret for 30 years. At work, Priya set a coffee on my desk one morning without saying anything. My supervisor Paul stopped by my office and said, "Door's open if you need it." First time he'd ever said that. I didn't post anything. Didn't explain anything publicly. I went to work. I came home. I had breakfast with Rebecca on Sundays. She made her dad's recipe for sweet potato hash and we talked about nothing in particular. Weather. A book she was reading. A client file that was giving me trouble. Rebecca introduced me to Thomas's extended family at a small gathering at the Yadkin Roadhouse. Cousins, a former colleague, a neighbor who'd known Thomas for 20 years. They looked at me like I'd always been in the room. Because for them, in the stories Thomas had told, I had been. For the first time in my life, I sat at a table where nobody looked at me like I needed to explain why I was there. Marcus called eventually. He didn't yell. He just sounded hollowed out and tired. "So you're in Aldrich now? Good for you." "I'm still at Morrison too. That's how names work." Silence. "I didn't know," he said finally. "About any of it." Dad never said a word. Not to me, not to Dana. "I believe you. I was a jerk to you growing up." "Yeah, you were." Another silence. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say here, Avery." "You don't have to say anything," I said. "But if you ever want to actually talk, not about money, not about the estate, just talk, the door's not locked." He didn't say anything for a second. "Okay," he said finally. He hung up. It wasn't a breakthrough. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was the most honest sentence Marcus had ever said to me, and I was going to count that for something. Dana, meanwhile, had discovered Gerald's house came with a tax lien from unpaid property taxes, about $42,000. She called me on a Sunday. "I could really use some help with this, Avery. You're good with numbers," and I was thinking maybe. "No. You haven't even heard." "I've heard enough." I kept my voice flat and even. "You knew I wasn't invited to Gerald's hospital room. You watched him erase me from everything for 29 years and you never said a word. And now you need help with the finances." "I was just a kid." "I didn't know." "You were a kid. Then you were 20. Then 25. Then last Tuesday, standing in that conference room." I paused. At some point, Dana, not knowing becomes choosing not to know. Silence. "I'm sorry," she said. Quietly. "I know. But I need some time." That's honest. I ended the call. Sat with my hands on the counter. No trembling. No rush of guilt. No old familiar impulse to smooth things over and shrink back down to the size that made everyone else comfortable. That impulse had lived in me my whole life. It didn't live here anymore. 6 months later, I moved into the Yadkin Road house. Rebecca had been staying in the garage apartment to look after the property, and she helped me move in. 3 trips in her truck. Boxes of books. Kitchen stuff. The bookshelf I'd built from a kit when I was 22, which barely survived the second trip but made it. "Dad's reading chair stays where it is," she said, dropping a box of kitchenware on the counter. "Obviously, the reading chair stays." Good. We're on the same page. The house smelled like cedar and old books and faintly like the coffee Thomas had drunk there every morning for 12 years. The floors were original hardwood, warm and scuffed in all the right places. The back porch faced east and caught the morning light in a way that made you feel like you'd done something right just by being awake. I still worked at Clearwater Financial. The commute was longer, 32 minutes on a clear day, closer to 50 on a Monday, but I genuinely didn't mind. The drive gave me time to think, to settle into the day before it started. I'd never had that before, living 12 minutes from the office. I'd always just arrived. I managed the trust assets on the side. Reviewed the scholarship fund disbursements. Met twice with the NC State Foundation about expanding the program's reach. Thomas had set it up for first-generation college students going into the humanities, philosophy, English, history, the things people told you weren't practical. I expanded the criteria to include accounting and business, with the condition that the recipients had to take at least one philosophy elective. Felt like the right balance. Practical and honest at the same time. Rebecca and I had breakfast on Sundays. She brought eggs from her neighbor's chickens, a retired veterinarian named Hank who kept 12 hens and was very serious about their names. I made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. We sat on the back porch and talked about whatever felt worth talking about that week. She told me things about Thomas I would never have known otherwise. The way he laughed at his own jokes before he even finished telling them. How he kept a running list and a notebook of questions he hadn't figured out how to answer yet. Ethical puzzles, philosophical tangles, things that kept him up at night not with anxiety but with genuine curiosity. How he'd coached Rebecca's debate team in high school and actually cried when they won the state championship. "He was a good dad," she said one morning, holding her mug in both hands. "Not perfect. Distracted sometimes. Stubborn about things that didn't matter. But good." She looked at me. "He would have been a good dad to you too." I didn't say anything. I just looked out at the yard, at the oak tree and the October light and Hank's chickens wandering along the fence line. "I know," I said finally. And I did know. That was the thing. You can grieve someone you never met. You can miss a version of your life you never got to live. The loss is real even if it's made of absence instead of memory. On my first real evening in the house, I sat at Thomas's desk in the study and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. The October light came through the window in long gold angles. Somewhere outside, a mockingbird was making a lot of decisions very quickly. I wrote, "Dad, you wrote one sentence to bury me. You spent 29 years making sure I had nothing and no one from the life that was actually mine. You hid my biological father from me. You hid me from him. You punished a child for a choice a grown man made, because Thomas Aldridge chose his wife and his family over you, and you never got over it. I think I understand, even if I can't excuse it. You loved someone who loved someone else more. That's a specific kind of hurt. Doesn't go away. But you had a choice about what you did with it, and you chose to aim it at a kid who never did anything to you. The envelope was supposed to be your final move. You wanted me to sit in that conference room and crumble in front of Marcus and Dana and Walter and everyone. You wanted it to be the last thing. It wasn't. You gave me the only honest thing you had, a sentence, and that sentence led me here. To a house where a man kept my photograph on his desk for 12 years. To a sister who was waiting. To a life that was always supposed to be mine. I'm not going to tell you I forgive you. I don't know yet if I do. But I'm not going to carry you either. Carrying you is what I did for 29 years, and I put that down the day I tore open that envelope. You had the first word. I've got the last one. I folded the letter once and put it in the top drawer of Thomas's desk, next to the silver frame. Two things in that drawer now. The letter I wrote, and the photograph of a 4-year-old boy holding a dandelion, the one Thomas kept for 12 years, the one that brought me here. About a month after I moved in, I found something while going through the desk drawers slowly, the way you go through a space that deserves real attention. In the bottom drawer, under a folder of old syllabi and a rubber-banded stack of letters from former students, there was a small spiral notebook. Thomas's handwriting filled it. Not a journal exactly. More like a working document. Questions he was sitting with. Half-finished thoughts. Ideas he kept turning over. The kind of private writing that isn't meant for anyone but becomes necessary anyway. Near the back, in darker ink than the surrounding pages, newer, written closer to the end of his life, a single paragraph that stopped me cold. If she ever found you, she would have found an honest person. I believe that because you came from someone honest, and I have to believe honesty passes down the same way eye color does, the same way the way you hold a spoon or the pace of your walk passes down. I don't know what your life looks like right now. I don't know who raised you or whether they did right by you. I hope they did. But I want you to know that whatever you built on the other side of the life I wasn't allowed to give you, you were not forgotten. You were the question I carried every single day. He wrote she. I sat still for a second. Then I laughed. A short, quiet, private laugh that surprised me. He knew. He always knew I was a girl. He wrote she the whole time. I sat with that notebook in my hands for a long time. Long enough for the light to change in the study, the late afternoon gold shifting into the softer gray of early evening. Then I took the notebook off my lap, set it on the shelf between two of his books, right where I'd see it every morning when I sat down at the desk. Some things deserve to be in plain sight. Marcus texted me about 6 weeks after the hearing. Not about money, not about the estate. Just, I've been thinking. About a lot of stuff. Dad wasn't who I thought he was either. I read it 3 times. Then I typed back. Probably none of our parents are exactly who we think they are. He sent a thumbs-up emoji, which, for Marcus, was practically a soliloquy. We're not close. I want to be honest about that. This isn't one of those stories where the estranged siblings reconcile over a meal and suddenly everything's fixed. That's not real life, and you'd know it wasn't real if I told you that's what happened. What's real is that Marcus sent a text and I responded, and we're somewhere in the long, slow process of figuring out whether there's anything worth building out of the wreckage of what we were all handed. I don't know how it ends. I'm still in the middle of it. Dana called once more in November. Not to ask for anything. She just wanted to check in. We talked for 40 minutes, her job, a trip she was considering, a show we'd both apparently been watching without knowing it. Before she hung up, she said, "I'm glad you found them. The Aldridges. I'm glad you found your people." I didn't have a clean response to that. So I just said, "Thanks, Dana." It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't reconciliation. It was 2 people who share half their DNA, and as it turns out, only half, figuring out very slowly and imperfectly whether there's something real underneath all the years of performance and distance. I'm not carrying resentment toward her. I'm also not pretending the last 29 years didn't happen. There's a lot of middle ground between those 2 things, and that's where we are. A few weeks later, I ran into a woman named Mrs. Claiborne at the farmer's market on Blunt Street. She'd been a family friend of the Aldridges for years. She bought a bunch of kale, turned to pay, and when she saw me, she stopped cold. "You're Thomas's girl," she said. Just like that. No question mark. "I am." She shook her head slowly with this quiet, wondering expression. "He talked about you like you were just somewhere out ahead of him. Like you were a place he was still on his way to." She put her hand briefly on my arm. "I'm so glad you made it here." I drove to the cemetery that afternoon. Thomas Aldridge's grave was in a newer section of the cemetery, under a young oak tree that hadn't fully filled out yet. Simple granite headstone. Thomas Raymond Aldridge, 1956 to 2023. He asked honest questions. I stood there for a while without saying anything. Then I said, "You looked for me. I know that now. I know you tried, and I know why you couldn't get through." I crouched down and pulled a couple of weeds from around the base of the stone. "I'm sorry it took this long. I'm sorry neither of us got the version of this that we deserved." I stood back up. "But I'm here. And Rebecca's good. And the scholarship you started is going to help a lot of people who need it." I paused. "I think that counts for something." On the way back to the car, I passed Gerald Morrison's grave in an older section. Newer headstone, flat granite, neatly kept. Gerald Raymond Morrison, 1962 to 2024. Father. I stopped. I stood there for a long moment. Then I kept walking. That evening I sat on the back porch of the Yadkin Roadhouse with a glass of tea and watched the sun go down over the neighborhood. The study light was on inside. Thomas's reading chair was visible through the window. My bookshelf was against the far wall now. Next to it, a small table I'd set up as a kind of display. Thomas's faculty portrait, formal and dignified with those exact eyes that are my eyes. My college graduation photo, cap and gown, 23 years old, my mother in the front row, clapping hard enough to hurt her hands. And a new photo Rebecca had printed for me, the two of us at the Aldridge family gathering, paper plates, sweet tea, matching half smiles. 3 moments. 3 pieces of who I am. None of them belonged to Gerald Morrison's house. All of them belong here. The mockingbird was still going somewhere in the oak tree. Streetlights came on one by one down Yadkin Road. I'm Avery Morrison. I'm 29 years old. I'm the son of a man who looked for me for years and never stopped. I live in his house. I work at his desk. I have a sister who is waiting. My father thought he left me nothing. He left me the sentence that unlocked everything. And the truth, when you stop running from it and let it arrive, has a way of finding you a better room than the one you were standing in. If this hit close to home, drop a comment, tell me which moment got you. Was it the envelope? The photograph on his desk? The moment in the parking garage when the DNA results came in? Whatever it was, I want to hear it. And if you've ever been made to feel like you were in the wrong frame, type "I stood up" in the comments. 'Cause that's what this was about. Not revenge. Not drama. Just 2 steady feet and the truth. I'm Avery. And I'm really glad you stayed.